You'll be nothing without me, Eleanor. Nothing. Those were Richard's parting words as he stood in our doorway, our home of 23 years, with 2 designer suitcases at his feet and his BMW keys dangling from his manicured fingers. Behind him, a sleek silver sports car idled in our circular driveway, its engine purring like a contented cat. Inside sat Veronica, his 29-year-old marketing director, her platinum blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight. I stood frozen in our marble foyer, still wearing the apron I'd put on to prepare the anniversary dinner he'd never bothered to call and cancel. 25 years of marriage, erased with a text message I'd received 3 hours earlier. We need to talk when I get home. Don't make plans. I built everything we have, Richard continued, his voice calm and practiced like he was closing a business deal. The house, the lifestyle, the social connections, all me. What exactly do you bring to the table anymore, Eleanor? The kids are grown. You haven't worked in decades. You don't even have a degree that matters. Each word landed like a slap, but they weren't new. They were just the final, distilled version of comments he'd been making for years. Little jabs that had slowly chipped away at me until I barely recognized myself. Why bother with that photography class? It's not like you'll ever make money from it. The dinner was fine, I guess, but remember when you used to really put effort into these things? Must be nice to lounge around all day while I'm working. I wanted to scream back at him, to list every sacrifice I'd made. Abandoning my journalism career when his first big promotion required relocating. Managing our home, our children's lives, his social calendar, and his aging parents' care. Being the perfect corporate wife, always camera-ready at company functions. 25 years of putting everyone else first. Instead, I just stood there, silent tears streaming down my face as he delivered his final assessment of our marriage. I've given you a good life, Eleanor. But I need someone who's still growing, still exciting, not just existing. He looked at me with something between pity and contempt. My lawyer will contact you. I'm being more than generous with the settlement. So don't get greedy. The house will need to be sold, of course. He checked his watch, the Rolex I'd saved for months to buy him on our 15th anniversary. You should thank me, really, he said, his tone softening into something worse than cruelty, condescension. I carried you for 25 years. Most men wouldn't have put up with it for half as long. And then he was gone, leaving nothing but the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and the echo of the heavy door closing behind him. That was how my marriage ended. Not with the dramatic shouting match I might have imagined, but with a clinical dismantling of my worth as a human being by the man who had once vowed to cherish me until death. The first month passed in a blur of paperwork, lawyers' meetings, and sleepless nights. Richard moved swiftly, as he did with all things. The divorce was uncontested. I didn't have the energy or resources to fight him, and the settlement was indeed generous by legal standards. I would have enough to live modestly after the house sold, assuming I found somewhere affordable and was careful with money. Our friends evaporated almost immediately. It turned out they had always been Richard's colleagues, Richard's golf partners, Richard's connections. They sent awkward texts expressing vague sympathy, then disappeared into the comfortable routine of their coupled lives, where divorce was treated like a contagious disease. Our son Michael, finishing law school across the country, called regularly but was deep in exam preparation. Our daughter Lily, teaching English in Japan, sent long, loving emails and arranged video calls despite the time difference. Their support warmed me, but also highlighted how alone I was in my daily life. The house, once filled with family dinners, homework sessions, and weekend gatherings, now echoed with emptiness. I wandered its rooms like a ghost, touching photographs and mementos from a life that no longer existed. At 52, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since college, crying myself to sleep, night after night, curled around a pillow in our king-sized bed. By the second month, reality began to set in. The house, our showcase colonial in an exclusive suburb of Boston, would sell quickly. I needed to find somewhere to live, something to do with myself, some way to exist that didn't feel like drowning. But each time I opened the real estate websites or job boards, Richard's words echoed in my head. What exactly do you bring to the table? You'll be nothing without me. Most days, I couldn't summon the energy to shower. I moved from bed to couch, picking at delivery food and watching mindless television. When the kids called, I put on a brave voice and lied about apartment hunting and reconnecting with old college friends. When they asked to see me on video, I claimed my camera was broken. The shame was suffocating, not just of being left, though that was painful enough, but of realizing I had no idea who I was outside of being Richard's wife, Michael, and Lily's mother. I had spent so long reflecting other people's light that I no longer knew how to generate my own. One afternoon, after ignoring several concerned texts from Lily, I forced myself to at least go outside. I walked to the small park a few blocks from our house, sat on a bench, and watched young mothers with strollers chat and laugh together. I had been them once, arranging playdates and discussing preschool applications. Where had that woman gone? The one with opinions and energy and plans? Mind if I sit here? Every other bench is in full sun. I looked up to see an elderly woman with a canvas shopping bag and a small dog on a leash. I nodded wordlessly and moved over. She settled beside me with a grateful sigh. These old bones can't take the heat like they used to. Neither can Pickles here. The tiny terrier mix at her feet looked up at his name, then flopped back down in the shade. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching children play on the swings. I was grateful she didn't seem interested in conversation. I couldn't bear the thought of small talk, of having to explain who I was when I no longer knew. My husband left me too, she said suddenly, her eyes still on the playground. 41 years ago this June. I turned to her, startled. How did you? The ring mark, she said, nodding at my left hand where a pale band of skin stood out against my summer tan. And the look. That particular look of someone trying to remember who they were before. Something about her matter-of-fact tone broke through my isolation. Does it get better? I asked, my voice cracking. She considered this, her wrinkled face thoughtful. Better isn't quite the right word. It becomes different. And then one day, you realize the different has become your normal, and it's a normal you've built yourself. She patted my hand. The worst part is right now when you're standing in the ruins. But ruins make excellent foundations, dear. Excellent foundations indeed. Before I could respond, Pickles stood up and shook himself, clearly ready to move on. The woman rose with surprising agility. My daughter's always on me to get one of those smartphone things, she said, digging in her bag and pulling out a small notepad and pencil. But I'm old-fashioned. She scribbled something and handed me the paper. That's the community center where I teach watercolor for seniors. Nothing fancy, just a little something I started after Harold left with his secretary. You should come by sometime. We meet Thursdays at 10. She walked away before I could even thank her, Pickles trotting happily at her side. I sat looking at the paper in my hand, feeling the first stirring of something that wasn't despair. It wasn't hope exactly, that seemed too ambitious. But perhaps it was the precursor to hope, possibility. I didn't go to the watercolor class that Thursday or the next. But I kept the paper, moving it from counter to table to bedside, a small talisman of connection. Meanwhile, the real estate agent's sign went up in our yard, and strangers began walking through our home, evaluating and assessing. As I began the painful process of dismantling our family's physical history, something unexpected happened. Beneath the layers of Richard and Eleanor, I began finding pieces of just Eleanor. A portfolio of black and white photographs I'd taken in my 20s, when I'd harbored dreams of photojournalism. Letters from a professor praising my writing, encouraging me to pursue publication. And then, tucked in the back of my closet, a dusty Nikon camera, a gift from my parents when I graduated college, long before smartphone cameras and digital photography had taken over. I held it in my hands, remembering the weight and feel of it. On impulse, I pressed the power button, not expecting anything from a device unused for over a decade. But miraculously, it hummed to life, the lens extending with a familiar whir. That afternoon, I took the camera to the park where I'd met the elderly woman. I sat on what I now thought of as our bench and began taking pictures. Children on swings, dogs chasing balls, sunlight filtering through maple leaves. When I returned home and downloaded the images to our old desktop computer, most were amateurish and poorly composed. But a few had something special. A genuineness that made me feel, for the first time in months, that I had created something of value. The next day, I went to the community center. The watercolor class had already started, but I slipped into an empty seat at the back. The elderly woman, whose name I discovered was Dorothy, nodded to me without interrupting her demonstration of a wash technique. I sat awkwardly, empty-handed, until the woman beside me silently passed over some spare paper and brushes. My attempts were terrible, watery messes that bore little resemblance to the coastal landscape we were supposed to be creating. But for 2 hours, I thought about nothing except trying to get the color of the ocean right. Not about Richard, not about my uncertain future, not about my failures. Just blue and green, and the way water meets sky. As we cleaned up, Dorothy approached me. "Eleanor, isn't it? You came." There was no surprise in her voice, just simple acknowledgement. "I did," I said, then added, "I'm terrible at this." She laughed, a rich sound that seemed too big for her small frame. "Of course you are. Everyone's terrible at first. That's the joy of it. Starting something at an age when you're not expected to be good at anything new." On my way out, I noticed a bulletin board covered with flyers. One caught my eye: digital skills for seniors. Learn to use your devices. Tuesdays and Fridays, 1 to 3 p.m. On impulse, I took a photo of it with my phone. That Friday found me in a small computer lab learning how to create and organize digital files. The instructor, a patient community college student named Jason, moved slowly through the basics. When he asked if anyone had specific projects they were working on, I surprised myself by raising my hand. "I have some old photography I'd like to digitize. And maybe learn how to edit it." Jason's face lit up. "That's perfect. We can definitely cover that. Next week, bring in some of your photos if you can, and we'll start working with editing software." Walking home, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in my chest. It took me a moment to recognize it as a flicker of anticipation, looking forward to something, however small. The house sold faster than expected, at slightly above asking price. I had 6 weeks to find somewhere new to live and move out. The prospect was terrifying, but no longer paralyzed me completely. I had started making lists, researching neighborhoods, considering options that would have been unthinkable months earlier. One evening, after spending hours scrolling through apartment listings, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, Eleanor, it's Veronica. I know this is completely inappropriate and you probably hate me, but I need to talk to you. Richard doesn't know I'm contacting you. Please." My hands shook as I read it. Veronica. The woman in the silver car. The one Richard had left me for. My first instinct was to block the number, delete the message, retreat back into the safety of my anger. But something, curiosity, or perhaps just the novelty of someone wanting something from me, made me respond. What could you possibly have to say to me? 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Appeared again. Finally. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was married when we started. By the time I found out, I was already involved. But it's not what I thought. He's not who I thought. I think you should know some things about the company finances. About what's coming." I stared at the message, my mind racing. What did she mean? What was coming? Before I could respond, another text arrived. "He's been hiding assets. Moving money. The SEC investigation is about to go public. I have documents you should see before the settlement is finalized. Please meet me." I met Veronica at a coffee shop 2 towns over, where Richard's social circle wouldn't venture. She looked different than the glimpse I'd caught of her in the car, more tired, less glossy. She pushed a manila envelope across the table, without preamble. "I'm not doing this to hurt him," she said, her voice softer than I'd imagined. "Or to help you, honestly. I'm doing it because I can't be part of this. I've already resigned." The documents inside were complicated financial statements, bank transfers, emails. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but I promised to show them to my lawyer. "You should know," Veronica added as she stood to leave. He says the same things to me that he said to you at the end. About carrying me. About what I bring to the table. She gave a bitter laugh. I have an MBA from Wharton and was headhunted for this job. But somehow, he still makes me feel like I'm nothing without his approval. After she left, I sat for a long time, turning a cold coffee cup in my hands. I felt no triumph in knowing Richard's pattern, no satisfaction that his new relationship was already souring. Just a profound sadness for all of us caught in his orbit, measuring our worth through his distorted lens. The documents proved crucial. My lawyer was able to use them to negotiate a significantly better settlement just days before the SEC investigation became public. Richard's company stock plummeted. There would be lawsuits, possibly criminal charges. While I took no pleasure in his downfall, the revised settlement meant I could afford a small but charming two-bedroom condo in a neighboring town, with enough left over to provide a modest cushion. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard's deception, meant to protect his wealth from me, had ultimately protected me from his impending financial disaster. Moving day arrived with surprising swiftness. As the movers loaded the last of my boxes, far fewer than I'd expected after decluttering a lifetime of possessions, I stood in the empty foyer where Richard had delivered his parting assessment of my worth. The echo of his words still lingered. "You'll be nothing without me." But something had shifted. The words no longer felt like a death sentence, but a challenge. What if being nothing meant being a blank canvas? What if it meant I could become anything? The first year on my own was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than childbirth, harder than sleepless nights with colicky babies, harder than managing Richard's parents' end-of-life care while raising teenagers. Those challenges had been exhausting but clear. I knew what needed to be done, even when doing it seemed impossible. This was different. There was no roadmap for reinventing yourself at 52, no clear markers of success or failure. Just days that needed to be filled somehow, a life that needed a purpose beyond merely continuing. I started small. I kept going to Dorothy's watercolor class, advancing from terrible to merely bad. I completed the digital skills course and signed up for an intermediate class focused on photography. I volunteered at the local library 2 mornings a week, shelving books and helping with children's story hour. None of these activities felt significant on their own. They were just ways to structure my time, to ensure I left my condo regularly, to practice being around people who didn't know me as Richard's ex-wife. One afternoon, 6 months after moving into my condo, I received a call from Michael. "Mom, have you been checking your emails? The dean of my law school wants to use one of your park photographs for their alumni magazine. The one I posted on Instagram when I visited, they saw it and loved it." I nearly dropped the phone.
What?
Why would they want my amateur snapshot? Because it's good, Mom. Really good. They want to know your rate and if you have a professional website. I didn't, of course. But that evening, Jason helped me set up a basic portfolio site with a selection of my better images. When the alumni magazine actually published my photograph, a moody black and white shot of an elderly man playing chess with a child, and paid me $200 for it, something shifted in my perception of myself. What if Richard had been wrong about more than just my ability to survive alone? What if there were other lies I'd internalized over the years? The dean's interest led to a few other small photography jobs, a local restaurant needing images for their website, a community theater wanting production stills. The money was negligible, but the validation was priceless. For the first time in decades, someone was willing to pay for something I created. Around this time, I also began taking weekly walks with Dorothy and Pickles. Despite our 40-year age difference, we developed an easy friendship based on shared experience and her unfailing honesty. "You're still waiting," she observed one autumn day as we circled the park's perimeter. "Waiting for permission to start living again." "I'm trying," I protested. "The classes, the volunteering. Those are toe dips, Eleanor. Good ones, necessary ones. But you haven't jumped in yet." She stopped, turning to face me directly. "What did you love before him? What made you feel most alive?" The question haunted me for days. What had I loved? Not just tolerated or been competent at, but truly loved? Writing, I realized eventually. And photography. Not as separate pursuits, but intertwined. using images and words together to tell stories. Before Richard's career took precedence, before children absorbed my creative energy, I had dreamed of combining these passions somehow. The revelation led me to a local community college, where I nervously inquired about continuing education courses. The advisor, a kind woman roughly my age, helped me enroll in 2 evening classes for the upcoming semester, creative nonfiction and digital photography too. The classes were challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. My brain seemed slower to absorb new concepts than it had been in my 20s. But there were unexpected advantages to being older. I had stories to tell that spanned decades. My life experience gave me a perspective the younger students sometimes lacked. And most surprisingly, I found I cared less about others' judgments than I had in youth. Each small success, a well-received essay, a photograph my instructor praised, built confidence that was entirely my own, not reflected glory from my association with Richard. By the end of that semester, I had developed a project combining photography and personal essays about women rebuilding their lives after profound loss. My subjects were initially friends of Dorothy's, women who had survived the deaths of spouses, children, or their own serious illnesses. I photographed them in environments where they felt strongest and interviewed them about resilience. The project was deeply amateur, but it ignited something in me. For the first time since Richard left, I found myself staying up late, not from insomnia, but from creative absorption. I woke early, eager to edit images or revise text. I filled notebooks with ideas, made voice recordings while walking, saw potential stories everywhere. With Jason's help, I created a simple website. Afterlives, Women's Stories of Renewal, featured 5 initial portraits and essays. I shared the link with my small circle, Dorothy, my classmates, the library staff, expecting polite acknowledgement at most. Instead, the response was immediate and unexpected. Dorothy shared it with her extensive network of friends and former colleagues. One subject sent it to her daughter, who ran a popular feminist Instagram account. A local arts newsletter included it in their monthly roundup of community projects.